have been recommending the use of face coverings for some time now, and it is already mandatory on public transport. I can confirm today that from the expected start of phase 3, which is the 10th of July next week, wearing face coverings will also be mandatory in shops. As with public transport, there will be some exemptions for children under 5 and people with certain medical conditions.
Well, isn't that funny? How they can pick and choose which type of people have to wear a face covering and which do not. So people that are able-bodied, perfectly healthy, will be forced to wear a face covering, whereas on the other hand, people that will be exempt are people with underlying health conditions such as respiratory issues, people in theory that are more susceptible to the virus, people in theory that would be more inclined to suffer more greatly from said virus. They don't have to wear face coverings, but everybody else has to. It's become mandatory, or it's going to become mandatory. Not yet, though. No, they're waiting until the 10th to impose this dictatorial policy. It's rather strange, if you ask me, how in this best part of 3 to 4 months now, people have had the option of whether or not they wish to wear a face mask. For a good portion of this time, the so-called experts were warning against wearing it. Then they changed their tune and said we should be wearing it. But for the whole period of this time, for the whole duration of this time, it has been voluntary, and the virus, according to them, has declined since then, which then begs the question, did face masks play any role whatsoever in the decline of this virus? How is it that now that the virus has declined in prevalence in the country, now all of a sudden we need to start imposing rules that we need to wear face coverings? Should it not have made more sense to impose this sort of rule when it was rather prevalent in the country? Would it not have made more sense to impose a rule such as this when the virus was in thorough circulation, right about the time of the start of this so-called pandemic? Why is it that as the virus declines, we need to start imposing rules as if it had not declined? Wow.
But for everyone else, face coverings will be mandatory. Now, let me be very clear, this is not a decision we've taken lightly. It has taken us some time indeed to reach this decision. But as we all start to interact more, it is vital that we take all reasonable steps to reduce risk. And we know that face coverings can help reduce the risk of transmission indoors. Also, in shops, as on public transport, contact tracing is more difficult because we usually don't know the people that we have been in contact with. So a face covering provides an additional layer of protection.
Non-essential shops have reopened in Scotland, and bars and restaurants are due to open up later this month. Thin Lips said the 2-metre physical distancing rule would be eased for some premises when the country enters the next phase of its route map on July the 10th, saying that face covering would be mandatory in shops from that date. It's imperative that we wear face masks, but we don't need to wear them yet. We have to start wearing them from the 10th and after. That makes so much sense. Thin Lips also announced that children under the age of 12 would no longer need to maintain physical distancing from other households while outdoors from Friday. Why? Why not? Are they not capable of transmitting the deadly virus? Or is it because they're not affected at all? Something that you know. Thin Lips has ordered further scientific study on the 2-metre physical distancing rule after it was announced a 1-metre plus system would be introduced in England. She always has to make out that she's doing things different from south of the border, but she also knows, and she loves to spout off shit from the World Health Organisation, that they themselves were recommending 1 metre as the recommended distance between people. We have the CDC that was recommending around 1.8. I believe in France it's 1 metre. In Australia and so on it's either 1.5 or 1.8. Germany it's 1.5. The point is it's different in multiple countries. So how come it's 2 metres here but 1.5 in Germany? How come it's 2 metres here but 1 in France? How come the WHO says 1 but Thin Lips says 2? Why is it different everywhere? I mean, if you're going to try and at the very least give off the illusion that the shitty narrative has any substance to it, then you should really all be sticking to the same script. But to just change it around depending on which country we happen to reside in, it really does blow little holes in your narrative. Anyway, she says apparently that the advice was clear, that as distance between people decreases, the risk of transmitting the virus increases. This fucking deadly virus. This deadly virus, that is, that we know now, or we have known for some time, More than 3/4, 77% of all deaths, including COVID-19 to date, were of people aged 75 or over. The greatest proportion of these deaths are people aged 85 plus, with 43% of them being COVID-19 deaths, comparing with 35% of deaths from all causes in this age category. You know, we know that the bulk of the people that die from or with, or presumed to have died from or with, COVID-19, supposedly, quote unquote, are people that are of pension age and above. Barely anybody at all in the brackets of 15 to 44, none of the age to 1 to 14, and none at all under 1. Some in the age group of 45 to 64, but again, it's not broken down into what was wrong with these people. It's not broken down at all. Also know, granted subject to change, that the death rate is much likely to be lower than the experts all claimed it would be when this was all first brought to our attention. Some studies showing it to be just as low as 0.26%. We also know that a good portion of the deaths in several, if not more, countries has come from care homes. Questions should be getting asked as to how that has become the case, but of course they don't really get asked. Any investigations they claim they will be conducting, I highly doubt they will be legitimate. That said, the point that I'm getting at is the majority of people that become ill and sadly die from what they are claiming is something separate to the flu are the elderly and people with underlying health conditions, but more often than not, elderly people with underlying health conditions. So why have we continued to lock down the whole country, young people and healthy people, as well as the people we should have been ordinarily protecting? And ironically enough, the people that we should have been protecting are still the ones suffering the most from the virus. So the question repeats itself again, what was the fucking point in the lockdown? And the bullshit about this lockdown resulting in so-called progress is in itself bullshit, because there's countries out there that did not have such stringent lockdowns, if any at all, and the virus is declining in these countries of its own volition, the same as it's doing here. But of course it's Thin Lips taking the credit for progress she claims they have made. Progress that realistically is being made in other countries. Yeah, okay. Anyway, Thin Lips also said the general advice remained unchanged and that as far as possible people should remain 2 metres away from other households. But she said in the view of the serious economic implications of maintaining the rule in all circumstances, she would allow exemptions for specific sectors where a 1 metre distance could be used if other safety measures are introduced. Well, isn't that something? So there's going to be exemptions where the virus will know not to touch individuals in this 1 metre environment, because obviously Sturgeon has differentiated an exemption. She's implemented an exemption, sorry. So it's okay for these exemptions that she herself has declared, but it's not okay elsewhere. I see what's going on here. I'm sure the virus the virus knows this. An example of this would be a pub or restaurant being allowed to relax the physical distancing rule where they can reopen if plastic screens are used to separate customers or better ventilation is installed. This is absolute absurdity, what's going on here. And you know, it's one thing to sit here and criticise the government, but the government's authority is based purely on people believing it exists. So realistically, my frustration should be directed at the people that buy into this 100%, because this is ludicrous. The seriousness of this virus has been so overblown, and the excuse that they could have used once upon a time that they were erring on the side of caution has been and gone, because instead of backtracking and admitting that they were wrong, they have decided to double down. Said that from the start of phase 3, the use of face coverings would become mandatory in shops, with exemptions for young children and people with certain health conditions. And how does the virus know to differentiate between somebody that does not have health conditions and somebody that does? So the virus will target somebody that doesn't have health conditions if they're not wearing a mask, but it won't target somebody with health conditions if they are not wearing a mask. The virus will not target somebody without a mask that has health conditions, but it will attack anybody else. It's rather bizarre that they can put these rules into place and the virus knows to follow them. The virus knows to differentiate between certain groups over others. Okay. Face coverings, which are already mandatory in public transport, could help reduce the risk of transmission indoors and provide an additional layer of protection. That is fantastic, but going back to a point I made near enough at the beginning of the video, this is the sort of thing, in theory, that would have made sense during the height, the peak of the infection rate, if you will. Not when it's on the decline of its own volition. Proceeded for a period with a voluntary approach. Some people are complying and some are not. And I'm not pointing fingers or trying to blame people for that, but we have to make a judgment if we're heading into a period where more people are interacting. But you said yourself that it's declining. You claim you're making progress. So it would stand to reason that during that period, people haven't been complying, and that's a big no-no according to Thin Lips. You need to follow her fucking rules. But for the ones that haven't been, it's still declined of its own volition during that time frame. Funny that. Business group CBI Scotland welcomed the easing of the social distancing rule, saying it would make a substantial difference to the viability of thousands of firms in Scotland. However, the Scottish Grocers Federation said it was extremely disappointed at the move to make face coverings mandatory, saying it would increase pressure on staff to enforce measures. Thin Lips said shop staff should not be expected to enforce the rule, with the police instead mandated to issue fixed penalty notices to people not wearing face coverings. So you're going to be fined if you don't wear a fucking mask. This is what we've come to now. This is the new normal, is it? Really? Saying that she accepts this may not be an easy rule to police, saying officers would act very proportionately and sensitively. What does that mean exactly? They either enforce it or they don't enforce it. The government is targeted effectively eliminating the virus north of the border, with the number of people estimated to be infected falling to 1,500 by the end of June, without having to wear mandatory face masks. Isn't that funny? The continued low prevalence of the virus meant further changes to lockdown restrictions could be introduced. The current 5-mile limit on travel for leisure purposes is to be eased from Friday, with people urged to behave responsibly and be sensitive to people living in rural areas.
Face covering provides an additional layer of protection. It's therefore for all of these reasons that face coverings in shops will be compulsory from the end of next week. But please don't wait until then. Get into the habit of it now. This is a really important way for all of us to help protect each other and to display that sense of solidarity that has served the country so well over these past few months.